Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Europe has been left to swelter in an unprecedented heat wave, temperatures hitting a blistering 47 degrees in parts of Spain. The UK recorded its hottest day ever. Well, the heat is exacerbating the effects of what was also an unusually dry spring in Europe, leading to widespread drought conditions and destructive wildfires. In many areas, it's leading to the loss of human life too. So is this simply what the future looks like, or can it be reversed? Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. It is the generally held view among climate scientists that the extreme temperatures we're seeing in Europe this summer would not have happened without human-caused climate change. Firefighters in Portugal, Spain, France, Greece and Morocco are battling blazes raging across tens of thousands of hectares. And this heat wave is predicted to last for several weeks. Are we now suffering the real-life effects of climate change, which we've been warned about for so long? Let's get talking. In Reading in the UK, we see Chloe Brimicombe, heatwave and climate change researcher at the University of Reading. In London, Tom Burke is here with us once again, chairman of third generation environmentalism. And we head north to pretty close to Inverness in Scotland, where we see Vikki Thompson, climate scientist at the University of Bristol's Cabot Institute. Vikki, I'm going to ask you, because I don't imagine your department's been around forever, what people thought about this sort of thing 20, 30 years ago, whether it would get to this point. But that'll come later, because I want to ask you first of all, Chloe, we'll start with you. On the hottest day ever in the UK, I sat in a car for 4 hours, which was not pleasant, and had to go to a funeral, which was equally unpleasant. How did you guys cope? Chloe, you first.
So on the hottest day, I was helping run a conference at the university, and we made sure that everybody had lots of water. And I was also informing a lot of people about the risk of heat waves in the media and my research, which is probably not as bad as you spending 4 hours in a car. That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah, the road melted. I promise you, I was diverted because the A14 in Cambridgeshire actually buckled. They said it was like a skateboard park. Tom, what did you do?
I stayed indoors. I closed all my doors and windows. I live alongside the river, and I tried to keep the hot air out and avoid any kind of need to walk in the streets. I did go out very briefly just to get some lunch, and it was so hot I practically felt my feet burning.
You thought you'd save the hot air for this programme. So you both survived. Thank you very much indeed. Vikki, if you were in Scotland up there this time of year, it's not as hot as that, and it can be absolutely beautiful. Did you actually enjoy it rather than just survive it?
I was working, so I was in my office that day, but the temperatures reached about 30 up here, so it was bearable heat up here.
Absolutely fantastic. So tell me, your department, climate change, Bristol University, there you are up in Scotland. You've managed to escape the west of England. You're up in the north of Scotland. I imagine that department didn't exist 40, 45 years ago. So how much have attitudes changed towards the seriousness of climate change?
Well, climate science does seem to still be a growing field. More and more researchers are moving towards climate change as it's one of the biggest areas of work at the moment. And the work makes an impact quite quickly, quite a lot of the time, as we've seen with this heat wave. Impacts or the attitudes are changing. More people are listening to climate scientists, and we're getting more time on the airways like this. It's brilliant to see this.
Well, this is something I wanted to talk about because there's a minister, well, he's a former climate change minister in the UK called Sir John Hayes. And he said there's been a bit of nannying about this, taking inappropriate measures. And he had this to say, this is not a brave new world, but a cowardly new world. We live in a country where we're frightened of the heat. The idea that we clamour for hot weather for most of the year and then shut down when it does heat up is indicative of the state in which we now live. You've got your own thoughts on that, but we're going to put up the 2 front pages from the same week from one of Britain's most popular newspapers. Sort of highlights his point. First one, headline, sunny day snowflake, Britain had a meltdown. In other words, gosh, get over it. And the next one, 40.3, hottest UK day ever, London's burning, nightmare of the wildfires. Chloe, what about the message that the media is getting out there? Does it scare people? And is the government quite happy, perhaps, to see people scared?
I think that the message we've been putting out as scientists is that we want people to realise that heat waves are a risk and that a lot of vulnerable people, so over 65s, under 5s, pregnant women, and those with pre-existing medical conditions and those that work outside are more at risk. And we also see about 2,000 deaths per year from heat waves. However, I don't think we want people to be so scared that they do nothing and they don't cool themselves down and have inaction. I don't think the Daily Mail has done a particularly good job in this heat wave. I mean, I have personal experience with the Daily Mail. They're not my favourite news outlet at the moment. But I would say that MP you said as well, call people snowflakes. And I think as a climate scientist, I would probably say that if he's calling me that, I'm more like a snow person because I completely believe in climate change. I completely believe we've caused it. And I completely believe heat waves are a risk.
But isn't there a bit of hysteria, Tom, about this? Because, yes, Chloe mentions the fact that so many people, unfortunately, lose their lives because of extreme weather conditions. And she added, every year. This isn't necessarily causing this or making it any worse.
The only hysteria around the place is in the Daily Mail, frankly, which seems to be hysterical because climate change is something it's tried to deny for a long time. And we're now discovering that the experience people are having is confirming what the scientists have been saying. And so the Daily Mail as well, and the politicians like Mr. Hayes, who are sort of support it, are well out of tune with where public experience is and what the public requirement from governments is. We've seen very clearly, time after time after time, opinion polls, not just in Britain where it's very hot at the moment, but all over the world, want governments to do more. And the snowflakes who really are the politicians whose sort of ambition to solve the problem melts in the face of its difficulty.
We're going to hear from Bill Maguire, Professor of Geophysical and Climate Hazards. You may know him at University College London, who said, this is just the beginning. When our children are our age, they will yearn for a summer as cool as 2022, because long before the century's end, 40 C plus heat will be nothing to write home about in the climate-mangled world they inherit. You first on this one, if you don't mind, Tom. He's exaggerating, isn't he?
No, he's absolutely right. What we had on Monday and Tuesday of this week was a personal taste of the future if we don't do something about climate change. And what we really do understand very well about climate change is we can't reverse what's already happened, but we surely can stop it getting worse. And it will get worse if we don't stop burning fossil fuels. It's a really simple thing we have to do to stop it getting worse, and that's to stop burning fossil fuels as fast as we can. And what the professor is not really spelling out is the fact that it's not just what happens to temperature or health, but it's what happens to food and water security. And when food and water security go, then you lose all kinds of political stability, social cohesion. You really do end up in a very, very unpleasant world indeed, socially as well as environmentally.
Okay, Vikki, before I come to you, let's put some figures out there. That record we talked about in the UK, Coningsby in Lincolnshire, I think it happens to be a military base, so they have the right equipment for that. 40.3, and that's between 4 centigrade and 5 degrees centigrade higher than the peaks of 1976. You probably don't remember it. I thought that was a wonderful summer. Whenever I could, I drove around in a car that you could take the hood down on. I wouldn't have wanted to do that this week. And 9 of the UK's 12 hottest days on record since 1884 have occurred within the last 2 decades. If it's almost too late, as Tom says, why are people going to bother?
Well, it's not too late to make a difference. We climate scientists do climate projections with different future scenarios in them. And the worst case scenario that we model does have these events happening almost every year by the end of the century. But we don't have to be on that worst case scenario. If we reduce our emissions, there are other scenarios which show much less impacts by the end of the century. We really need to hope that people start listening, the governments and businesses listening and reducing the emissions so that we can move ourselves down onto the more optimistic scenarios for the future.
Long before records were kept, there are those people who think that this was part of the natural cycle. Well, can you show them that proves that isn't the case? Because if you haven't kept a record of how hot it was in 1703 or in 1461 or how cold it was, how would you know?
Well, we do have these proxy records going back thousands of years. And on those, we can see that this is the hottest it's been over the whole 2, 3, 4,000 year records that we're able to get.
Sorry, what do you mean by proxy record?
Using things such as ice cores and tree rings, you can look at them and see what the temperature would have been. Things like trees, the amount of growth they do each year depends on the temperature, and ice cores have particles stored in them which tell you things about the temperature of the past.
So you're pretty certain that that is accurate enough, because if you look at tree rings and count them, it's also supposed to tell you exactly how old they are, and I never seem to get the correct number that the tree surgeon tells me it is.
Yeah, they can use lots of trees, not just a single tree, and by looking over a vast variety from across the globe as well, we can see that we are definitely in the warmest period of the last couple of millennium at least.
Let's talk about fossil fuels. Tom, you mentioned them there. Chloe, let me come to you on this one. First of all, in Germany, we did a program about this, a roundtable about this just a few days ago, saying that Germany's firing up its coal-fired power stations. You really haven't got a hope when the world's as volatile as it is in meeting, A, the net zero targets that the European Union has set, or encouraging everybody to get rid of these things in their entirety, because as we've seen this month, they're vital.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so with the cost of living crisis, what this shows us is that I really am for climate justice, which is the idea of addressing social injustices and inequalities to then also address climate change. So if we had a green transition in the UK and created jobs for those that were in the fossil fuel industry and didn't rely on gas from other countries and oil from other countries, then we would not basically be seeing as bad a cost of living crisis as we currently are. And I think it's about speed and necessity and skilling people up so that people don't get left behind and the inequalities don't get any worse.
But my point is that we don't live in a perfect world. This is not utopia. People have to fire up the power stations because it ain't Narnia. It's the real world.
Yeah, I am not saying that it is Narnia, but I would hope that through addressing climate change, that we could live in a more equitable world. Maybe I'm foolish for thinking that, but that is my genuine hope as a climate scientist, because I think the science evidence shows that we need a green transition, and we need to take everybody with us, including the global south, including people that are socio-economically deprived here in the UK. And I don't think that corporations and governments and billionaires are doing enough to reduce their emissions to help those people.
See, the thing is, Tom, you have a green coalition in Germany, probably the group of people that would be least willing to do what they're doing at the moment and firing up their coal-fired power stations. If they're doing it and they see that it's absolutely vital, what chance is there of convincing the rest of the population that doesn't have such an such an environmental agenda, if you like, that it's something that we should all take so seriously?
Well, the Green Minister, I heard him justifying saying that just on the radio this morning. He's quite right. When you have a short-term emergency, you do short-term things. If you let those short-term emergencies cloud your view of strategy, you don't end up getting your economy right, you don't win wars, and you certainly won't win the battle against climate change. I don't have a problem with somebody firing up a coal-fired power station to deal with the fact that the Russians have invaded Ukraine. I would have a difficulty if people then concluded we should go back to using coal as a way of supplying our energy. And as Cleo said, we are much more secure if we improve the efficiency with which you use energy and we generate it from wind and solar ourselves, so we don't have to rely on importing it from countries which may be vulnerable.
But the point is, if the four horsemen of the apocalypse are arriving any day soon, when it comes to the tipping point in the world's climate problems, then even one day of using a coal-fired power station, let alone several months or a couple of years of using them, is a bridge too far, surely, for people like you.
No, it's not. And it's not, David. It's not a bridge too far. The planet can cope with us making the occasional error. What it can't cope with us is making a strategy out of something that will destroy civilization.
But Tom, I've listened to you and I've listened to others saying we haven't got a day to lose. And now you're saying, well, you know, it doesn't matter if we don't do it tomorrow, because
that's not what the scientists. That's not what the scientists are saying. What the scientists, and indeed what governments have been very clear, is we have to get rid of burning fossil fuels by the middle of the century. That's not tomorrow. We've got time to do it, but we've got to get on with doing it fast. And we mustn't get out of proportion temporary things that we have to do that aren't compatible with it because of what's happening in geopolitics and in war and those other things. Let's be clear about what our strategic goal is. It's to stop burning fossil fuels by the middle of the century. If we do that, we won't be safe, but we'll be a lot safer than we will be if we don't stop burning them.
How come, Vikki, other countries don't seem to moan as much as we do in the UK? Not only when it's raining, when it's snowing, but when it's as hot as this. How have they decided that this is the world, if this is the world we have to live in, then we're going to be able to manage?
Well, I'm not sure that that's quite true. Lots of countries in Europe are breaking records at the moment and are in extreme wildfire risk, and they're not saying this is okay either.
I'm thinking more about the built environment. How do people sort of find themselves more comfortable in other places? What could we do in this country to mitigate the issues that we face when it goes above probably about 15 degrees, let alone 41?
Well, looking at how other countries live, countries where 40 degrees has been the normal for a long time already, you can see that their cities are built quite differently to what we're used to. They have a lot more shade. There's more trees. Cities with more trees naturally will stay cooler, have less of an urban heat island effect. So adapting both the buildings and how we live, so changing our daily schedules to match what the hotter countries are doing, are ways of making it easier to live with the heat.
Well, give me an example of that, would you? How do we change our daily lifestyle?
So if you look at the Spanish, they often have siestas in the middle of the day. I'm sure we'd all love to have a few hours off in the middle of the day to go and have a sleep, and it would help our heat health impacts.
Well, do you know, I was reading an article just a few hours ago in which somebody Spanish was bemoaning this national stereotyping and saying, yes, it was true all these years ago because it was done to protect agricultural workers, and it's just become a social norm. We could manage by carrying on through the day. And they're also saying, take a look at London. It's got more parks than any other major city in Europe. It has got the right idea when it comes to putting in trees and bushes, et cetera, et cetera. Barcelona, he said, was just a concrete city.
In London, there are pockets of parks, but there are also pockets of some of the areas of the country that have the worst heat hazard when it comes to these sort of events, areas with the least shade and the worst setup for the heat. Old buildings or older buildings where the residents have no shaded outside space, top floor flats are particularly vulnerable to heating up. Those places in Spain that have much hotter situations, they often have shutters on the outside, which they're able to shut to keep the upper floors much cooler in the heat. And lots of their balconies and verandas will have awnings to keep them shaded, even if it's not trees.
Now, Chloe, and I wanted to ask you about temperatures and the wildfires that we've seen in this country and indeed in other countries. Because my guess is it's not so much the heat that causes it, it's the extreme dryness of the ground. And therefore, whether it was 40 degrees in the UK or 32 degrees, those fires would have been pretty much just as likely because the ground is tinder dry anyway. It's not so much the heat, it's the drought.
I think that I would argue it's both. So when you have a wildfire, you do need a spark to ignite it. And we know that management of forests is key because if there's a good management of a forest, then there's less tinder on the ground and a fire is less likely to start. And also you have accidental fires when people use things like disposable barbecues because if you put it on the ground, it heats up. Often it can burn the ground. I think that it definitely is to do with the drought and then also the heat, but also high winds are really dangerous with wildfires because they spread them over a larger area than otherwise would occur. And we know that there's been national emergencies across Europe. And also I saw a report just out that firefighters in the UK and London were saying it was like a war zone, which is really not good. I don't think that is a good thing to say, and they were overwhelmed with the number of calls they had in London.
Well, indeed, they absolutely were. So it was the busiest day they've known in the fire service since the Second World War. But I want to ask you about this hot air that you talk about. Because in a sense, when you get hot air rising and then cold air coming in, you create convection. This is what causes clouds, etc., which you will know better than me. Does that become more intense as the temperature goes up, Chloe?
Not always. So we have what's called a dew point temperature, which is basically how much moisture is in the air and how warm it is. And basically when it's slightly cooler, this goes up. So I'm pretty concerned about when rain comes in, and this is particularly true in the tropics, and it meets hot air because this suppresses our ability to sweat, which is known as sort of heat stress. And this means that we have less of an ability to cool, which means we're more likely to have heat-related illnesses. And I think this is something that we should be looking at, as well as these dry, hot extremes that can cause wildfires or exacerbate wildfires, because it could be more of a risk to human health than just dry, hot extremes, especially in areas that are monsoonal.
Okay, Vikki, I don't know whether you've seen this. This is from the Met Office, the UK Meteorological Office, and they did a hypothetical forecast for the year 2050, and it had, let's say, Newcastle in the north at 38 degrees, Norwich 40, Southampton 43. That was for the year 2050. People will see it on our screens now. And then this Tuesday, well, 2022, the actual forecast pretty much mirrored everything that was there in 2050. We often complain about the fact that we don't know what's happening with the weather from one week to the next, but I've heard the Met Office, the weather forecasters, praise for the fact that things have got a lot better. So will we know when this sort of thing is coming in the future?
So this event was really well forecast. 3 weeks out, some of the models were showing that we were going to see temperatures above 40, and the climate scientists and the forecasters were pretty shocked by it. We weren't quite sure whether we should be believing what we were seeing, but the models continued to show this all the way up to the event, and it was very well forecast across the UK and across Europe. The forecast models are getting better. When we can forecast this 3 weeks out, they're doing an incredibly good job. But we need to match this with hazard warnings as well. For this event, the Met Office put out their warning about 6 days ahead. We had this red warning go out that's never happened in the UK before.
Do you think it made any difference?
Sorry?
Do you think it made any difference?
I think a lot of people did pay attention. Tom said he stayed inside all day. He followed the advice of the Met Office.
All right, well, let's ask Tom. Did you stay inside all day because you were listening to the experts or because it was too hot outside?
No, I stayed inside because I'm listening to the experts saying what they're saying. I've been paying attention to them for some time. What's frightening to me is how right they've been when they've described the future, and it's turned up. And what's really frightening now is it's turning up faster, and it's worse than they were originally saying even 2 or 3 years ago. So we really do need to pay attention to them. It's why I took such objection to the Daily Mail saying we're all being hysterical, when actually the only people who are being hysterical are the Daily Mail.
Vikki, let me come back to you. One of the things you said is that we need to think about where we're going to be in the built environment in 20, 30 years, which means starting work right now. Is there more of a chance of that happening so that people are comfortable and not dying in such large numbers when it's really, really hot than there is of actually getting to the goals that we need to stop this being a problem in the first place?
Well, I would love it if we could mitigate this, if we could reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and not see this risk in the future. So there's no need for the adaptation. But we've already built in a lot of the change. What happened 10 years ago will affect what's happening now. What's happening now is going to affect the future already. So we are going to have to adapt. We have got some time. And if we start now, there is time to adapt the way we live and adapt our built environment to cope with the heat.
Chloe, what a waste of money it would be if we spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds, euros, dollars on getting all our houses up to scratch, but we actually listened to the climate scientists and it wasn't as hot as we thought. We'd have freezing cold houses and we'd have a better world, but you just wasted millions.
I think this week goes to show that climate scientists are actually very knowledgeable about what's going to happen in the future, and it wouldn't be a waste of money. And also a lot of the cooling technologies, so there's a specific type of heat pump technology, can be used for heating and cooling and reduces emissions, so it wouldn't be a waste of money. Also insulation, proper insulation in your house reduces emissions, but it's also good for heat waves and keeping your house warm. So a lot of the things that you put in place for heat waves are called win-win situations because they reduce emissions and are good for other hazards.
What a good
and
idea.
Are good for reducing
Very, very good
everything.
idea. Tom, I'm picking on you, only because we've got about 40 seconds left. You going on holiday this summer?
Yes, I'll go on holiday
Somewhere hot?
this summer. Well, I'll go down to Plymouth where my family live.
Take the sunscreen. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Great to have all of you on. I'm glad we didn't go on about climate change all the way through the programme. We covered so many different areas, and you're all so very, very knowledgeable. And you all survived Tuesday. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme and pointing out, let's put the Daily Mail up there on the screen one more time, that sunny day, snowflake Britain had a meltdown was a complete contretemps when it comes to the next day's headline, Nightmare of the Wildfires, 40.3 degrees, the hottest UK day ever, London is burning. Don't always believe what you see on the front pages. That's the message. Thank you very much indeed. Chloe, Tom, Vikki, thank you wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster. Until next time, stay cool. Bye-bye.